Hello everyone, it's Mr. Barden here. This video is going to be all about how computers hear audio, how they, interpret the incoming signal from a microphone, how microphones work, and then just a little review of just how the physics of sound works. So again, this is going to be focusing a lot more on physics and concepts and some electrical properties of microphones and similar devices. So before we hop into that, definitely consider giving this video a like, subscribe if you enjoy it, if you learn something. It's definitely helpful, and I am very appreciative of it. Also, if you have any questions or if about anything, maybe you made something cool using this knowledge and want to share it, put all that down in the comments below. I love seeing what the community does. I love being able to answer questions, and being able to answer these questions makes me able to make better videos in the future. So definitely, if you're unsure about anything I mention that down in the comments below, and let's just hop into it. So, as you can see from the slides here, this is geared for my sound design course, where we talk about a lot of audio production concepts and practices, and we make some music throughout the year. This is definitely applicable to anyone working in these areas. And normally I would like to pass around the various equipment I'm talking about as I talk about it, but it's kind of hard to do that through a virtual format. So I would definitely recommend, after watching this video, go do a little bit of creative searching if you need to dive further into, okay, what is a dynamic microphone? I know how it works, but what is it? I have a few pictures here, but I feel that might be helpful for everyone. So, let's talk. So, basically, sound travels in waves of pressure from a source. I've got this wonderful little kind of old diagram from Dan Russell here, and this is showing that the sound source is going to oscillate, move back and forth, and that's going to be pushing the air molecules next to it, and then they're going to bump into the ones next to them, and so on. And it's going to result in this kind of bunched up wave of a higher density of air molecules. This just means there's a higher air pressure here, and then they all kind of bounce off of each other and it relaxes. But then those ones that bounced off are going to go hit these other molecules here, and so on and so forth. And we basically get this wave of high and low pressure, and that is traveling through something. Usually when we're talking about sound, we're talking about air. But it doesn't have to be air. It can be whatever you want it to be. And that's what's happening. These little red dots are highlighting that, again, the individual molecules are not moving that far. It's just they're bumping into each other and packing, densing up. Densing up, that's a verb now. And then spreading out. And then there's a link here, if we go to it, with the Chrome Music Lab. They have some great stuff to check out. Not, it's not sponsored in any way, but you can kind of see how waves are traveling through everything. And as we get higher, the amount of these wave cycles per second that hit our ear increase. So as the pitch increases, the amount of times per second this high pressure hits your ear also increases. A lot of times in computer music, you'll see this sound represented through a waveform diagram, which is this yellow line right here. I've just zoomed it way far in. And basically, when you see this, you'll know that, okay, it's a wave, it's repeating. Whenever it moves up, we'll see that it's a very dense collection of these molecules, as opposed to a looser, what we call rarefaction in waves here when the line moves down. C, this line at C is neutral, so no sound at all, and that's what we can see at A. That's just a short little description of that. All right. How the human ears work. I'm going to hide myself real quick just so you can see everything. If you need that longer, you can pause the video. I'm going to explain all this, but it's really boring just to have text on the screen all the time. So I'm going to head over to this diagram of the ear I found online. So this is the human ear. Most of the ear is inside of your head, kind of in your skull. The part on the outside is called the pinna. And this is, this part right here. And what it's going to be is kind of like a satellite dish. It's picking up these incoming sound waves from everywhere and helping to funnel them into your ear canal. As you move down your ear canal, we hit this little green circle right here. And this is the eardrum, or the tympanic membrane is what it's called a lot. And these air pressure waves will hit this and cause this to vibrate in the same pattern. And these vibrations just get kind of funneled through a few small bones into this snail-looking organ called the cochlea. Inside of this is a bunch of fluid and, for lack of a better word, hairs. Basically, the different frequencies that travel through here will stimulate different portions of this organ. So really high frequencies, may stimulate parts down here where my mouse is. As the frequency is a lot lower, it may travel further through here and stimulate something maybe down here or over here. It varies. The point is, it's going to stimulate some nerves, and this is going to send different signals into the brain. So these different signals will, tell the brain, hey, different sounds are happening. This is how humans are able to differentiate between high and low sounds, because it's physically different nerves and different collections of nerves sending these impulses to the brain. All right, so again, that's just a really brief overview of some of the physics of sound and how humans hear stuff. I brought this up because we're going to talk about microphones. And all a microphone is an electronic ear. Again, an ear takes incoming sound and converts it to a nerve impulse, which you could think of like electricity. Not quite, but tomato, tomato. But a microphone takes in these incoming impulses from the sound source and converts them into an electronic signal that then gets sent through the wires and blah, blah, blah into the computer. Or wherever it happens to be plugged into it. So it converts them in different ways, but this electrical signal can then be recorded, amplified, or changed however we need to. And that's the core of how we've made recorded sounds for the past, century and a half or so. So there are several different kinds, and they all function slightly differently. I'm going to talk about the two ones that I have in my classroom mainly, but I do want to point out real quick a ribbon microphone diagram. So there's a type of microphone that I don't have, so I don't normally mention it to my students. You all, watching this video might have different scenarios, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a ribbon microphone. These microphones are made by suspending this metallic strip in between some magnetic poles here. And as our sound waves hit the microphone, it'll stimulate different portions of this electronic strip. Very, very, very similar in concept to the cochlea, where it stimulates different portions of the organ. And because this strip is also hooked into an electric circuit, which I'm not going to break down right now, it will change that voltage, and that gets sent out the back of the microphone to wherever we can interpret it as this electricity. The goal is to create an electrical an electrical analog, an electrical facsimile, I guess, of the sound pressure, where instead of this sound wave representing physical air pressure, it's now representing analogous amounts of electricity, so high and low voltages. That's going to be the same for every microphone. Okay, probably the most common ones that we have are dynamic microphones. These also have a reputation for being some of the more durable and sturdy microphones. They're pretty hardy, especially the most common ones, which we'll see a picture on the next slide. That's more difficult to break, not impossible, but the big thing is that they normally do not require any extra electricity to function. The way they work, and I have a diagram here on the next slide, is by taking a metal coil, and having this wire wrapped around a magnet. Then, as the airwaves enter the microphone system, there is a diaphragm here that is connected to the wire, and it's very, very tinily, minusculely pushes that wire around back and forth against the magnet. Again, like those molecules up there in that previous diagram. If you know anything about just electrical engineering, you know that moving metal around magnets like this generates an electrical current. I'm not going to break down the physics of that right now, but by doing that, it then generates that electric current and sends it out the wires, out the back of the microphone. A lot of times these will need to be amplified a fair bit, and you need to have your microphone pretty close to the sound source. I have right here a dynamic microphone that it's hooked up to a special amplifier because it's very quiet, and it works best when I'm pretty close to it. If I was a lot further away, I mean, it still works. It might be a little harder to hear me. I just think it has a nice sweet spot of about 6 to 8 inches, which is why I have it about where it is. Probably the most well-known dynamic microphone, and just the thing, whenever people just think microphone, in my mind, is the Shure SM58. So all of this part here is just kind of hidden right there in the microphone. The rest of that is just form factor for the handheld use, and then there's this grill protecting it. So again, if I was to turn my camera back over here so we can see more of my microphone, and if I were to pull off that little cover and filter, you'll see that, again, there's this protective grill, but then there's a bit of a diaphragm right there, and then all of the capsule with the magnet and the wires just sitting right there doing its job. Let's just put that on. I hate taking that off. Just because I'm afraid I'll stretch it out one day. But that's a dynamic microphone. They all function in subtle variations of this, and they have varying form factors because this is pretty small. This is drastically different from a condenser microphone. These tend to be a little bit more delicate because of the components involved, and these require additional electricity in order to work. The way that they work is like so. So what we're going to do is we're still going to have the incoming sound waves hitting a diaphragm. That's the same thing. But instead of having wires wrapped around a magnet, we're going to instead have a circuit here that is energized. And most of the time you get it through phantom power, which is usually supplied by the computer or the audio interface from the wall. But you can find some of these that have built-in batteries. But we have electrified this circuit. There's a ground and a resistor involved. I'm not going to break everything down, but as we push these metal bits closer together with the air pressure, it's going to, again, cause these variations in voltage amounts. So again, if they're further apart, it's harder for the electricity to flow. That voltage is going to drop a little bit. And as they get closer, it'll come back up. And that's how they work. It generates those changes that gets sent out the back of the microphone, down the cables to wherever you're going to do it. Because really you only need to run wires to 2 little plates, we have a lot of these what's called large diaphragm microphones, and then again it just has the discs up here, and then we just run the wires down below where the most of it is housed. So these tend to be a bit bigger. There's also the what's called a small diaphragm condenser, and those, if you just Google pencil mic, you'll see that, again, they are very, very small because they don't need to be big. It's 2 metal plates and a bit of circuitry. So, again, you can have these in a variety of form factors without the need of a ribbon of a certain length or a certain amount of wire wrapped around a magnet. These tend to be a lot more variable in what they look like, but they generally function the same way. Again, the capsule, this is where all the bits are located. They generally have some kind of cage and wind guard, but not always, but generally there's always some kind of protection against the devices. Right here I have, again, that Shure SM58. We'll just make it a bit bigger for the sake of the video. And I'll move it up here. So again, if you remove that windscreen, there's the capsule with the diaphragm just right there. So we can talk right into it. I also tell my students, do not drop my microphones. I mean, they're not so delicate that they're just gonna break if you look at a microphone wrong. But if you're messing around, it's gonna break them. And if you've ever had to buy microphones, you know that they are very expensive. So that's why I tell them, hey, if you break my shit, you're gonna fail. But anyways, that's just a little tangent about my students. Let's get back to the microphones. Again, the whole thing, I mean, yes, it's a microphone, but all the electronics tend to be condensed in a smaller area. The last thing I want to mention, speakers. I don't care about speakers right now. We're going to skip the speakers. I break that down more with my students. If you want to know more, you can pause the video, read it. Basically, a speaker is just like a dynamic microphone, but in reverse. We send current down the wire to the magnet. That causes the wires to move and the diaphragm to push the air, and we hear it. That's the really short version. Right there, you can kind of see the diagram. What I wanted to really talk about was response patterns. So microphones respond differently in different scenarios. Let me just hide myself real quick so you can read the screen right there. Okay, so basically I've got some, again, capsules here, and they usually have this little diagram on the side indicating what their response pattern is. What this means is this is the area around the capsule where the microphone is the most responsive, where it can pick up the sound the best. The most common is cardioid, and I like to utilize this microphone to show this for my videos. You can see my gross living room back there. It's a little messy, but the sweet spot is right here in front of the microphone. Kind of makes sense. It's, the area you talk into. But as you move around to the side, it becomes less effective. And that's what I pointed at the screen, that's what this diagram is illustrating. And I'll just do this acoustically by moving my head around the microphone and talking. You can probably barely hear me as I get to the back end. And as I'm moving more back towards the front into that sweet spot, it sounds more like normal. So there's a variety of them, with cardioid, this vaguely heart-shaped pattern, being the most common. This one here is omnidirectional, so it'll pick sounds up all around it. There's hypercardioid, where it's picking up specifically parts behind the microphone. Those are really useful for like interviews or recording two sources at once and things like that. The reason I want to bring this up is because it's important to know whether your microphone picks up its sound from the top end or the side. This one would be at that top end of the microphone, this end right here, whereas this one would be on the side. You notice, comparatively speaking, they're both long tubes, so I would, instead of talking directly into one end, I could talk into it like this. It varies from microphone to microphone, so just check to see what you've got. The last little section is just, what does the computer do with all this information, all this electrical current from there? So computers do not just receive raw current and know what to do with it. We have to digitize it into a digital signal, meaning ones and zeros. In order to do that, we have a circuit that is called an analog to digital converter. If you have an external audio interface where your microphones are plugged in, this is that device. It's also other things, but this is the main part. It takes the incoming raw electrical current and turns it into numbers. The way that it does that is it's just receiving the current, and every so often the computer essentially takes a snapshot of whatever the voltage is and saves that as a number. And then it'll move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And it saves these numbers in a big sequence, and then it'll play through them in order, and that will represent the approximate amount of voltage that was in that microphone recording. The frequency that this happens is called the sample rate, and those individual snapshots are called the sample. Now, I just kind of arbitrarily said every so often. That's because it varies, but if you've ever played a CD, which is, not terribly low quality, but, it's a CD, that was sampled usually at 44,100 times a second. That's a lot. There's mathematical and physics reasons as to why it's that much, but we're not going to break that down right this second. Just know that for higher definition audio, you need more samples. Again, it's kind of like having a 8K super high resolution image or a 144p image. One has a lot more data, a lot more higher resolution image. That makes the file a lot bigger. That's less of an issue with modern computers, but that is something to be aware of. But generally, we can find, 48K being a nice high def audio. A lot of things can go as high as 96, but I don't normally see them that high just because of, again, that's a massive file size compared to, this 48K. I can't talk anymore, with very minimal change, diminishing returns there. The other thing to talk about is the bit depth. So when it takes a sample of the audio, like I said, the computer assigns it a number. The computer will have a set amount of numbers it can assign the voltage to. It basically says, hey, your voltage is here. That's closest to this number, so we're going to assign you to that number. That's what it'll be. The more options the computer has, the more, again, high resolution the audio happens to be. So, again, the standard is 16 bits worth of information, and that is 16-bit computing. It's using all of that. I wanted to see... there it is. So that means that in 16-bit audio, every time it takes a sample, it has a little over 65,000 options to put that electrical voltage into. And that's, again, just 2 to the 16 right there. Minus 1, I guess, because of the 5. You, again, can increase this up and up. Again, I've seen things, 24, 32 bits. I really don't see much more above 32 bits because, again, we're getting massive chunks of data, massive processing just to import and record the audio, let alone do stuff with it. So, it's pretty obvious. Again, standard for most audio things is 16-bit depth, and then 44.1 on the sample rate. And just to illustrate these concepts working together as we're starting to approach the end of our video together, I have this graphic. So in this case, again, this is extremely simplified, but the red line is the incoming microphone signal. The blue dots are the samples taken by the computer. And you'll see that it's going to, at each sample interval, find the closest bin, I'll say, to put the closest bit to put the sound into, and it will put it there and save that data as a number. So again, it won't match up, but when we're doing this, 44 plus thousand times a second with, 60,000 levels of, differentiating between them, it can still form a very accurate sound recording. I mean, you're listening to this video, you're hearing me talk, it's not going to be too bad. And then just because I vaguely mentioned the speakers briefly, I'll mention the last little portion. Once you've recorded this as a file, again, it's just a stream of numbers. We can use the virtual audio effects, these algorithms, in order to process and change the numbers. And basically, we just feed the numbers into the algorithm on one side. It does its math and outputs new numbers from there. In order to hear it, we just have to essentially do the opposite of what we've done already. So we have what's called the digital to analog converter, wherein the computer, sends a series of numbers to this circuit, and then the the circuit will be like, oh, 5, I know to output this much voltage. Oh, 4, I know to do a little bit less, and so on. So it's getting these numbers that tell it how much to adapt and change its electrical voltage. That gets sent to the speakers, and they push the air so you can hear them. And that's in a extreme nutshell how sound works, how computer audio generally works, and how microphones and human ears work. There's a lot of information in 25 minutes, but I think that's just about everything. At least that's important for the students of my classes to know. So this is where I'm going to wrap it up. Now that I've got through this stuff, I'll just say again, if you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned, definitely put those down in the comments below. I love being able to further answer and develop all of these concepts. If you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, definitely consider liking and subscribing to the content. If I remember to get it up there, I will share these Google Slides in the description of the video, so you will have them as well. That's going to be it from me today, and I will see you all the next time that I see you. Bye.